The life of Dr. Thomas J. Atchison, who was a gift and an utter light to all those who knew him. I want to say a few Zoom orientation things, and then I'll say a bit more before we tip this off to Marie and the rest of the family. So a couple Zoom things. We'll be doing a blend here of pre-recorded and live video. This is all being recorded and will be on our church's YouTube a little later during the day. So it's accessible afterwards as well. I want to invite you to make sure that you are on speaker view, not gallery view. That'll help just so you can see in the biggest screen possible all the speakers and the video content that we've put together. I want to invite you also to watch the chat down below, where info is going to be placed for ways to keep sharing Tom's legacy and memory. And you are all muted now, except for those who are also speakers in the service. So we ask that you remain muted for the duration of the service until we come to the time where we do breakout rooms at the very end of the service. And so now, friends, we gather to comfort and to support one another in our common loss, to celebrate Tom's life, and to commend him, our father, grandfather, and dear friend, to the never-ending love of God. This is a time here to feel whatever arises. It's a space for us to pour out our grief, as much as laugh and smile at the many wonderful memories that we have of Tom. Tears are welcome in this space, and laughter is just as welcome as well. Some of you gathered here are churchgoers. Some of those gathered here, this may be your first time. I just wanted to welcome you virtually to the United Church of Christ of La Mesa. My name is Kelly Ryan, and I am the pastor here. And this space, actually, this sanctuary space, is one deeply shaped by Tom's care. He and his family were key in designing this chancel space to be what it is today. So for this moment, we gather as beloved community, aware of how precious each life is and the divine love that abides no matter what. And so Marie would like to welcome you as well on behalf of the family.
Hi, am I on?
Yes.
Yes. Hi, I'm Marie Edwards, daughter of Tom and Betty. And on behalf of my three brothers, Mike, Steve, and Pat, we would like to welcome you and thank you for joining us as we honor our dad, who passed away on December 5th, 2020. Sadly, we're unable to gather and celebrate together. So our youngest brother, Pat, has put together a special video to highlight Dad's life and to show how he touched so many people in his 88 years of life. We love you and miss you, Dad.
As we move into this video, I want us to ground ourselves with this opening prayer. Dear God, fill us with your grace today, that though we grieve the loss of Tom, of Dad, of Grandpa, that we might remember that our depth of grief also connects with depths of love. Grant that your Spirit might intercede with us with sighs too deep for words. And no matter what we bring today, no matter what feelings are present, empower us, God, to let them come and let them be held in this communal virtual space together. Grant us strength, grant us peace, and above all, may we know that nothing, not even death, can ever separate us from the love that grounds us. Amen. And so now, as Marie said, we have some pre-recorded video that Pat Atchison has put together featuring stories and memories from many different folks throughout Tom's life. So Phil will cue that up now.
childhood was weird because we were in separate homes. Our mom was working, the war was going on, um, the economy was bad, and she was divorced and on her own. So in those days, you didn't have daytime things for kids and that sort of thing. So children went into homes, a little like foster homes nowadays.
Yeah.
And so Tom and I were in separate homes. So there were a lot of time during our young years that we did not see each other that often. We saw each other now and then on weekends, especially the early years. Mom would pick us up for the weekend and maybe another story he's told you, she would drop us off because she had to do some shopping being a working lady. So she would drop us off at the Hitching Post movie theater, and they showed nothing but Westerns. And when you walked up to the opening there to get your ticket, you had to leave any guns at the office there. You were not allowed to take in a gun. Of course, they were just all plastic things. And so it was very cute for kids.
Yeah.
And Tom and I think Gene Autry and there's another one. We were big fans of theirs. And,
Yeah.
so he was always my big brother. He always took good care of me. And as I got older, he took good care of me whether I wanted it or not. So
Watched out.
we had a few arguments here and there. And Tom was the older he got, he was very social. When he got in junior high and high school there in Pasadena, he was always having friends over, and they would sit on the back patio there and laugh and just have the best time. And I always thought it was neat because I was 3 years younger, and here were all these good-looking boys over. So I would always make them cookies or something like that, and they thought that was great. But he was always my brother. After I got married, he still was. He looked after me took care of our wedding and anything that needed to be done there. And he was just a neat guy, and he never, nothing ever got in his way. I mean, if he wanted to do something, nobody ever told him he had a handicap. That, that's who, me? I don't have any problem. That was his attitude. So
he figured out how to just.
Yeah, he wanted to play tennis. He figured out how to hold that racket, how to hit the ball.
Yeah.
I was like a junior, senior in high school, and I had met a boy, and I was sure that I didn't want to go to college. I'll just get out of high school and get married. Well, when my mother heard that, she had a conniption fit. So she called Tom and said, okay, what are we going to do about this? They always used to gang up against me. So they came up with the thought, okay, we're going to get Kim up to Stanford, and we're going to get her a date for one of the big dance parties. And that's what happened. So, of course, I had, my escort was this tall, good-looking guy who loved to dance, which I always did. And so it took one weekend of that, and I went back home, dropped the boyfriend.
Decided maybe college was worthwhile.
Yeah. So, and then from then on, he periodically, if they were having a big party, my mother would let me go up on the train. And so he always had something organized for me, some date or, whatever. Yeah. So as I say, he was always watching over. And, but we had an interesting conversation, one of the last conversations I had with him. We were talking about, I always thought of Tom as being a serious student. He was the brains. I always said my brother had the brains. I was an art major. So we were talking about that, and he said, well, to be honest with you, my freshman and sophomore year, he said, I just really screwed around. I just had a good time. I didn't really apply. And he said he didn't know where he wanted to go, what he wanted to do. And so I was laughing. I said, oh, okay, now I figure we've spent our first few years in college the same way. And then he was saying that he ran in, somebody said that there was a professor he should go talk to. And maybe he could kind of figure out where he wants to go. So he said he talked to him, and it was just fantastic. He knew exactly what he should do. And he said once he got into that and started majoring, he said, I really got down to working. I loved what I was doing. And I always thought that Betty was such a good mate for Tom, because she knew his talents. She knew what he could do if he applied himself. And she just was always behind him, always pushing him a little bit, which was good.
Yeah.
Both he and I, a little push never hurt us. And she was a wonderful wife for him. I think he got twice out of life what he would have had with anybody else. And she was a great mom too.
Hello, my name is Ann Johns, and I am a member of UCCLM, the church that's putting this memorial on. And I'd like to read something that Tom himself wrote recently for our newsletter. Tom says, I pretty much grew up without religion. The only thing I remember was that I decided in 7th grade to read the Bible from cover to cover, finishing in the 8th grade. I went to a Catholic boys' school for the first half of my high school under the Christians brothers, and they taught me how to think about religion. Partway through my education at Stanford, I met and fell in love with a beautiful redhead, Betty. She came from a long line of Congregationalists, so marrying her, I automatically became one too. Then we moved to San Diego in the 1960s, and we were told some of my colleagues at SDSU to find the Congregational Church in La Mesa. We attended here, and we found it very friendly. We were also warned that the church was in a process of combining with another church. Indeed, it was, and going to church each Sunday was a different experience. But we stuck with it, and UCC La Mesa was our church throughout all our children's growing up and until we moved back to the Northwest. Here's a comment again from Tom. Betty was strong and would get what she wanted. One Sunday, she looked at me and said, I hate the way the front of the church looks. The building was designed to be for education, and the front was a stage. She continued, our daughter is getting married here soon, and I would like to see it fixed up, but I don't know how. Tom's reply was, I agree, and I know what needs to be done. He had spent many, many Sundays looking at the front of the church and being depressed by it. Betty agreed with his plans and took the idea straight to the church council, sold it to them, and got it completed by the time of their daughter's wedding. Then Tom makes these comments about UCCLM and why they stayed for so many years. Here is why we stayed at UCCLM. The first reason is that it professed and acted upon a liberal theology. The second reason is that it became the heart of our social relationships. This was illustrated when I came back to San Diego after Betty died and was welcomed back to the church to the extent that I found a new wife, Frances, quite soon. Along with social relationships, we were very active in church activities, Betty and I. I know that Betty was at one time or another on every church committee, and she was the first female moderator. I may not have been on as many committees as she, but I did spend my time as moderator. Then Franny died, and although I lived in Chula Vista, I tried out the UCCLM virtual service and found it was the best thing I had experienced in years. We're sorry, Tom, that you didn't have much more time to continue with this best experience. We loved having you back with us. Thank you for the many years we had with you, with Betty, with the children, and with Frances. Amen.
My name is Robert Mundinger, aka Bobby. As I was known growing up in my early years with the Atchisons. Recently, Pat had informed me about Tom and invited that I share some thoughts and feelings about him as we celebrate his life today. I've been very fortunate to have a career that I'm able to associate and touch the lives of our youth, mostly on one-on-one settings, but occasionally I will meet with a large body of youth. And one of the lessons I love to teach is the lesson on heroes. In our lesson, we kind of define what a hero is. And then I have the great opportunity to tell them about one of my heroes, that being Tom Atchison. Not only was Tom a great hero to me, but he also was a mentor. Tom lived a life without limits. In the obituary, Tom mentioned that Betty gave him one of his greatest gifts, the gift of having, to him, being considered a normal life. But to me, Tom was one of the most normal people I've ever known. Tom was a mentor and helped me to understand the ways of life and to live an efficient and effective life, if you will. He taught me about grit. He taught me about the love of reading. He taught me about how to use my time. And most of all, he taught me the love of life. He did this in words, but it was mostly through his actions.
Growing up, Dad was like pretty much any other dad, just a little more special. Mom pretty much ran the show, but Dad was the heart and soul of our family. At Mom's memorial, Dad said, "Betty gave what to me was a great gift, that of being normal. Like most young people, I wondered whether I would have a good life. To me, as a person with a handicap, that was one in which I would have a family like other people. Betty chose to cast her lot on me and gave me that gift. To love another person as deeply as I have loved Betty, and to have the love returned, has gone far beyond my dreams. I feel I feel truly lucky to have had that long time we had together. I am left with a large, close-knit family to provide me with comfort."
Tom's career path started with a visit to his advisor at Stanford his sophomore year. The way he described it is that he liked studying people as opposed to other topics, and his advisor suggested a course that was brand new to psychology called industrial psychology. He took the class, was intrigued by the topic, and the rest was history. He completed his psychology degree at Stanford, got an MBA at UCLA, and then a PhD at the University of Washington. He started as a professor at San Diego State in 1965, and he was considered a tough but fair professor. For Tom, getting up in front of students was not something that came naturally to him, but he really worked at it and was very proud of the time that he spent teaching as a professor. Over his SDSU career, he was a successful writer that included many books and numerous academic articles, and he was also spent time as the department chair for a few cycles. That was a role that he very much enjoyed. So one of his students was Dan Gilbert, and let's hear from him.
Hi, my name is Dan Gilbert. I've known Tom since the 1970s. Tom was my graduate advisor at SDSU at the time I was completing my master's degree. I had a couple of classes with Tom, and he also served as my thesis chair. I remember Tom being a fair and very interesting professor. I will never forget the entrepreneurial class that he taught to this day. When I do something or go somewhere, I always think of a way to do it differently than I had done it before. Tom taught that to me, and it's definitely stuck. During the time I was working on my thesis, Tom showed great patience and understanding. My mother was seriously ill and in fact passed away during that time, and Tom was always very generous in giving me extra time to complete my academic work. He made it all possible. More recently, I got to know Tom and Fran as part of the Retirement Association, and it was a great pleasure getting to know them both. It was always fun to visit with them, and it made our events extra special. They will be greatly missed. My best to the family, and know that you are all in our thoughts. Thank you.
Tom took early retirement to pursue more opportunities to travel and different types of challenges. And Tom and Betty moved up to the Pacific Northwest to build a retirement home. But after Betty died, Tom decided he wanted to move back down to San Diego.
I'll tell you, now I'm going to cry. Now that I've been through
You cracked it, I know.
and
Yeah.
seeing you, you are so much like your dad. Oh my God. I'm sorry. I'll be okay. Bender. I met Tom when he and Betty joined the church that I attended. We had children who were about the same age, so life in the church revolved around the activities of families and friends. That was more than 40 years ago, and Tom has never seemed to not be a part of that community. After the passing of Betty, his marriage to Fran, also a church member, put him back in the friendship circle because Fran was a longtime friend. Tom is one of those people who always seem to land on his feet. He had faced any number of life's challenges, but he always seemed to rise to the occasion. The death of Betty, the terrible accident he and Fran had, and then Fran's death. The thing I admired about him with all this is that I never heard him complain. Now, maybe his kids could dispute that, but somehow Tom could put a positive spin on those things. He was generous with his time and resources. Something that he and Betty did for me will never be forgotten. Newly divorced and facing the first Thanksgiving alone with my 3 sons, Betty called and included us in their family celebration. There was comfort in the food and the noisiness of 7 kids around the table. Another of Tom's traits, which never failed to amaze me, was his total acceptance of who he was and how he always seemed to be able to laugh. I'm sure many people will talk about Tom's great laugh. Just one incident about how Tom viewed himself. He happened to be near the choir as we were robing up for Sunday service one time. I'm only 5'2", so not many robes fit me well. I was putting on my robe, slipping my arms in the sleeve, and then flapping them with the complaint that nothing fit my short arms. I glanced over at Tom, who remarked while flapping his arms, saying, "I know what you mean. I have the same problem." What could I do or say? We laughed together. And I think that incident just is so reminiscent of who Tom was and how he just took life and enjoyed it to the best he could. Tom will be missed by all of us. There's not much to say about a life well lived.
Everybody, thank you for joining us. I'm Michael Province, the son of Fran and Tom's eldest stepson. Tom and my mom were married in the year 2000 or 2001. They're loving friends at UCC La Mesa threw a great party and helped give them a nice start, a wonderful start to the 2 decades of life they enjoyed together. My brother John and I had known Tom and Betty and our new step siblings our entire lives, but we came to love and appreciate Tom in new ways over the next years. John, Laura, and I had already witnessed some of the many ways Tom's wonderful presence made our mom happy. I hope my mom made Tom's life better, but I know for sure he made Franny's life better, immeasurably better, and happier. By his good sense, kindness, generosity, and occasional no-nonsense gruffness, we all appreciated him. Both Tom and Fran had difficult childhoods, and both of them had developed a certain amount of toughness over their lives, but Tom's toughness was inner toughness, not outer toughness. My mom, not so much. By his love and support, he softened her and helped her enjoy life and other people. He told her to relax, and by God, she listened, and she paid attention, and she did relax. None of us had ever seen anything like it, and we still don't understand how he managed to soften her edges and help her relax a little. For years, as I taught and tried to write books, my mom would respond to my trials and tribulations without much sympathy. And she'd always mention a neighbor, some now long dead acquaintance, who'd written a high school textbook and made a lot of money, or at least what she considered a lot of money, enough to buy a fancy car. And this friend was her reference for academic success, and I was never likely to measure up. And I got so tired of hearing about this guy every time I mentioned any work project. Of course, Tom was a successful and beloved San Diego State faculty member for several decades. And I couldn't stand always being compared by my mom unfavorably, even in a not unkind way, to this nameless neighbor. And so one time I just had it. And when she left the room, I said to Tom, Next time I hear so-and-so's name, I'm going to scream. And I have no idea what he said to her or how he did it, but I never heard that name again. And the next time I went to visit them, she said, "How is your book coming along, sweetie?" I couldn't believe it. And so to us, Tom was a miracle worker. And he was a kind of a miracle come to life. And we'll miss him so, so much. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Brikena and I'm from Albania. I met Tom and Betty in Albania in year 1992. This was about 2 years after the fall of communist regime. So Tom was part of San Diego State University professors who had come at the university where I was teaching to teach faculty business classes. And at that time I was teaching at the university. I was teaching English. So when this group of professors came, I became their interpreter and translator. So I was translating from English to Albanian and the other way around. And I remember very well that faculty and also students loved Tom when he was teaching. They loved his way of teaching. Especially I remember they loved when he was teaching using group discussions, because this was something new that we were not used to. We were just used simply lectures. The professor lectures and you just listen and take down notes. But there was no group discussion. So they loved this interactive way that Tom was teaching the class. They loved his sense of humor. And they also loved the fact that he was very, very approachable. You could come and easily talk to him. Tom and Betty also, while they stayed in Albania, they loved to meet people. People invited them in their homes, and they went there. They were very respectful of people. People loved them, and also they loved to try Albanian food. And I remember they loved my mom's meatballs, and especially Tom loved my mom's cookies. Actually, when I came to the United States, I brought a bunch of those cookies. And at the same time, they also loved to get to know the country. So they traveled around the country, and they traveled even to places that the travel conditions were far, far from ideal, but they wouldn't mind at all, never complained. They just enjoyed this adventurous trip, especially outside in the villages. And about 2 or 3 weeks later, while I was visiting Tom and Betty at their apartment while they were staying in Albania, they told me that they would like to sponsor my master's studies to the United States so that I could come and pursue my master's studies. And I was so thrilled and I was so excited by the news of it So it's finally, my dream was coming true. And I will always be grateful to what Tom and Betty did for me. I'm always thankful about that. I was so sad to see that Tom passed away. I will always remember him as a very generous, wonderful person, a great sense of humor, helpful, and may he rest in peace.
Hello, it's Pat. So the start of 2020 was tough on my dad, with Fran passing and with the isolation of the pandemic and lockdown. But as the year progressed, he was in better spirits, and the family stayed in contact with him with regular Zoom calls, and then he and Lynn had become something of an item. So it was really all that much more tragic when he had his fall, and because he was really doing quite well. And when my dad fell, it seemed like a pretty innocent stumble, but he hit his neck on a counter. And originally, he seemed like it was going to be all right. He was joking around with the ER, but he was on blood thinners. They took him to the hospital. Well, after an hour or so, he started to have problems breathing, and they discovered he had a large hematoma in his neck, and it was pushing on his trachea and his esophagus. So he had to go into surgery, had a tracheostomy, and so that, the next thing he knew, he was breathing through a hole in his neck and had a feeding tube. And then the challenges began with him struggling with a cough, that it just took a lot of his energy away. And there were a series of ups and downs with him going back and forth to the ER, to the hospital rooms, the care center, and he wasn't doing very well. And through that process, at some point he contracted COVID, and that was too much for him to recover from. And, while COVID was clearly what finally killed him, it was, I really feel like the indirect effects of COVID also made a huge difference. Just not being able to visit him in the hospital to provide him, the comfort, encouragement, oversee his care, it was very frustrating. So as we got closer to the end, we were able to have my dad at home, and that gave us a chance to have some more final visits, both in Zoom calls with family and friends. And I really appreciate all the calls and the cards we received cheering Tom on while he was in the hospital. And I want to say that I really valued the input and guidance and support that Lynn shared with me as we went through all this. He died peacefully on December 5th, and he will be missed.
Okay, what I tried to do in looking at this project was went around and talked to people about what they understood and remembered about Tom. And the first thing that they remembered about Tom, and Fran for that matter, was perseverance. That you've heard the childhood stories about him teaching himself how to tie his shoes, I'm sure. But here, the big story was about 10 years ago, they were in a horrific automobile accident. There was some question whether they even walk again. Well, between the two of them, Tom and Fran just determined they were going to be able to do that. And within the time I've been here in 3 years, they were in charge of the walking group that walked every Saturday. So they didn't just do it a little bit, they did the great big return to normalcy. Another word that people used to describe him was he was positive. There was virtually nothing he did that he didn't find a positive shift to. I may have heard the story too about him feeling like although he had somewhat of a handicap, he said he always felt lucky because he had a thumb. The amazing positive attitude to have towards things like that. And also the other thing he used to talk about a great deal was Fran and Betty were his girls. And he talked about how they made him feel like he was part of everyday life and he was normal, which was really important to him. And I noticed that also on walks around campus with him. He talked to everybody and they treated them all equally, whether you were the janitor or you're the CEO. Everybody knew Tom. And he wasn't a hail fellow well met. He was a quiet, gentle soul. But everybody knew him. And this morning I showed a picture to my housekeeper and she was in tears. So that's the kind of guy that he was. And like I have a couple of cards I want to read. One of the gals said, Tom was such a fine man and everybody admired him. And I think that pretty much sums it up. He was also amazingly non-judgmental. You know, in a place as big as Frederica, we have some cranks here and there. And he just kind of smiled at his eyes, his blue eyes twinkled, he smiled. And he'd say some kind of a funny recollection about them. It was never judgmental. It was always like, it's a very curious human being we have here. And that was something else I noticed about him. He was very interested in people in general, very inquisitive. Wouldn't know what made him tick. He also was very humorous. And one of the sides of this was in the dining room, which is fairly large, whenever there was a good joke told at the table, everybody in the room could hear Tom laugh. He had a laugh that filled huge rooms. He also had a very dry sense of humor. And sometimes I didn't know if he was joking or if he was serious. So for instance, at one point, he suggested that we might try to see more of each other. So we went to lunch in the dining room. Because of the COVID regulations, we couldn't sit together. And he looked at me and said, we've got to find out some way to eat lunch together. So we went over and talked to the gal in charge of such things. And she said, well, there's only two ways you can eat lunch together. One is if you get married, which we didn't want to do. And two, you can get a room together. And he looked at me and I looked at her and said, well, I guess we got to get a room together. So it became a big joke that was the reason why we were going to do that. And just another one of the letters I got from people. Tom was such a fine man, highly intelligent, kind, and outgoing, with a great sense of humor. He was also a storyteller, and I think a lot of people didn't know him well, didn't see that side of him because it took a while for him to warm up to the idea. But he had a memory for things clear back to his childhood. And every trip he went on and all kinds of funny little instances in between. So one of the things I missed the most is his storytelling. He also loved life. He loved everything there was to do with curiosity about what went on. So one of my other friends wrote, Tom was a gentle soul who graced our lives with kindness and humor. And I think at the end, I'd like to just end up with a short poem I wrote to Tom after we lost him. See if I can do this without crying. My world crept onward sepia-toned, quiet, unassuming, predictable. Then you walked my way, called me with your stories, intrigued me with your calm and honesty. Soon my world blushed with splashes of pastel. Desert sand sparkled with pale pink and orange. 1 week, months, I dared not stop to count the days. You became the painter of auroras of light blues, green, purple, filling my world with your tales, my dreams with your dreams. Then the fall, the beginning of lights out. Splashes of light dimmed to pastel as you faded. Now you are gone, my world returns to sepia. Goodbye, Tom. Thank you.
And so as we remember the stories of this one dear and beloved life, we so too connect to the ancient and timeless wisdom of the Christian scriptures, We'll have readings from Steve and from Mike Atchison, beginning with Steve, reading John 14, 1 through 4, and 27.
Calling that's hard. Let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house there are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. And you know the way to where I am going. Peace I leave with you. Peace I give to you. Not as the world gives, do I give to you. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid.
Thank you. And we'll also hear from Mike Atchison, reading Romans 8, 38 through 39.
One of the great things about being Dad's son, when I was young, I remember Mom would have parties and I could hear my dad laugh. So wherever he was, I always knew that he was around. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, nor angels nor principalities, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor any other created thing will be able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus our Lord.
Thank you both, and thank you all for the memories you've shared thus far. In the time I knew Tom, his kindness, resilience, and his warm spirit were obvious. The times I got to chat with him, the welcome and good nature he embodied just radiated from him. I think many of us then wrestle with imagining life without his quick laugh, his wry smile, and his huge heart present with us. And he leaves behind a legacy of adventure, courage, and joy for those who knew and loved him. He's remembered by his booming laugh echoing across the valley at Pilgrim Pines Church Camp, or maybe nonchalantly whooping somebody at volleyball or tennis up there. He's remembered by the many adventures he crafted for his family, creating travel memories that changed them forever. He's remembered by his quick wit, his warm spirit, and of course, his characteristic resilience that allowed him to overcome any adversity. He did not accept limits for himself. He pushed through them with creativity and with a smile. And so we will celebrate the tremendous life that Tom led today and the stories shared of many hearts and lives he touched and changed. And we touched on the year 2020, and I think this has been one of the hardest years many of us have known. And so Tom's loss may also touch on other griefs as well. But the wonderful thing about gathering like this to commemorate the life of someone that we've lost is that we remember here, virtually online now, that we are not alone in our grief. And in sharing joyful memories of Tom, he lives on in our hearts and in our memories, especially when shared and spoken and remembered with one another. So I invite you to cruise through and look at all of the people who are on the service with you here. We share grief here as much as a celebration of who Tom was. So if you feel alone, and there will be days when this can feel lonely, know that there are many people who are in the memory of Tom with you. So don't hesitate to reach out if you're having a hard day. And if you're bearing up too, if you're feeling pretty sturdy, check in with someone to see how they're doing. These are times when we need all the connection and all the love that we can create and offer for one another. There's this line in Paul's letter to the church in Rome that we heard when during this community's own uncertainties and grief as they're trying to figure out what step next to take. The Apostle Paul reminds them that they are wrapped up in this long arc of grace and love, that's the ground we're standing on, that we've been standing on. And he reminds them that nothing in all creation can ever separate us from love. And so this remains the love that lives on in joy, in beauty, in adventure that Tom has gifted us with. A new normal will be shaped around this loss, touched with the love that remains. Even when Tom is no longer physically present, his presence in some way lives on. Like we heard from the Gospel of John, a peace remains with us. Peace not as the world gives, but in an eternal and deep way that is ours as Tom's spirit lives on in our hearts. One of the early Christian writers once said, "The ones whom we love and lose are no longer where they were before. They are now wherever we are." So though right now we feel keenly the places and the moments where Tom is no longer with us, his passing means that he is now, in some ways, always with us. We'll now hear from some of the members of UCCLM singing "Remember Me."
Remember me in a Bible cracked and faded by the years. Remember me in a sanctuary filled with silent prayer, and age to age and heart to heart, bound by grace and peace, child of wonder, child of God, I've remembered you. Remember me. Remember me when the color of a sunset fills the sky. Remember me when you pray and tears of joy fall from your eyes, and age to age and heart to heart, bound by grace and peace, child of wonder, child of God, I've remembered you. Remember me. Remember me when the children leave their Sunday schools with smiles. Remember me when they're old enough to teach, old enough to preach, and old enough to leave, age to age and heart to heart, bound by grace and peace, child of wonder. to heart, child of wonder, child of God. Remember, age to age and heart to heart, child of wonder, child of God.
And so now I invite you all to join your hearts with me in these ancient words of commendation for Tom. Into your hands, loving God, we commend your servant Tom. Welcome him as a child of light, a son of your redeeming, and a soul transformed into love that never dies. Receive him into the arms of your mercy, into the blessed rest of everlasting peace, and into the company of the saints of light. And now let your servant go in peace, according to your word. Amen. We now have a closing reflection from Pat Atchison, as well as a farewell from Tom's grandchildren.
So thank you, Pastor Kelly, and everyone who participated in our Memorial Day. Certainly in putting this together has brought about many great memories of my dad, his laugh, his interest in so many topics, good nature, his determination, and I certainly experienced that determination of his on the tennis court. Yeah, great. He was amazing that he could play tennis with a handicap but really from my perspective, he was just a darn good player. I never did beat the old man. Came close a few times, but not only was he good, but he was crafty, and he played to win. He had this, he'd hit this drop shot, sucker you in, and then he'd hit some expert lob over the top of you, and he had me running all over the place all the time. But those were great times. So as we close out, I thought I'd go back to his shoe tying story. It's one of those family stories we've all heard many times, but it really highlights his determination to be independent. So here's how he wrote it down. Obviously, my handicap has been the biggest ongoing challenge throughout my life. Physically, I've always had to figure out how to do everything, but without a model of others that I can copy. I had to learn that it was up to me to figure things out. My shoe tying story goes like this. I wanted to go outside and play. I went to my mother and asked her, tie my shoes so I can go outside. She replied, no. And furthermore, you can't go outside until you've tied your shoes. I can't, my dad replied. Figure it out, she said, and she left the room. I cried, and she did also, but in 45 minutes, I went outside having tied my shoes. So my dad taught me how to tie my shoes, and this is what it looks like. Hey, it works. So in addition to all the great looks, receding hairline, and all the great memories he's left, this is just, one more piece of him that will live on.
Hi, Kara here. I'm gonna miss Grandpa's big belly laugh, his long conversations, and poking, and his little side pokes. We're gonna miss you, Grandpa. We love you. Bye.
Hi, I'm Crystal Zimmerman. I am Tom Atchison's 4th grandchild, and I just want to say how much it meant to me to have him in my life throughout the years. In 4th grade, he picked me up from school when I broke my arms. He's made it to high school graduations, to my weddings, and I was able to introduce him to my boys, his great-grandsons. I've also been able to spend time with him in his retirement community at Horsehead and other places throughout the years. I love you, Grandpa, and I miss you.
Hi, I'm Christine.
Hi, I'm Stephanie. And I'm Sarah. We're Steve and Miriam's daughters. I'll always remember my grandpa's laugh and his advice.
I'll always remember how much he encouraged us in all of our academic pursuits.
I'll always remember our one-on-one conversations. We'll miss you dearly, Grandpa.
Miss you, Grandpa.
Miss you, Grandpa.
Hi, I'm Lisa. One of the things I'll definitely remember of Grandpa is the Christmas that he was at our house where he was reading the Occasion Night Before Christmas. He had the entire family just dying laughing because he read it so well. It was so funny. So certainly you'll be missed, Grandpa. Love you.
Hi, Danielle Atchison Lau here. I loved Grandpa's laugh, his clucking, and the fact that he could play tennis so well, and cruising around town in his red BMW, his stick shift, and he was just a pro at everything he did. And he will be so missed. I love you so much, Grandpa. Love you. We'll miss you always. Bye.
Hi, I'm Coleman. These are Stella and Isla. I'm Tom's grandson, and these are the great-grandchildren. I'll probably miss playing tennis with Grandpa when I was younger and him getting into tennis lessons. Miss you, Grandpa.
Hey, it's Nick, Morgan, and Brett.
And we were 3 of Grandpa's favorite grandkids.
Being the favorites, we got to travel the world with him.
I went ziplining in Belize.
I saw the Harry Potter studios in London.
And I hiked volcanoes in Italy.
And we're going to miss hanging out with Grandpa in San Diego and having sleepovers at his house in La Mesa.
And I'm going to miss calling him and him taking me to the movies at any time.
And I'll miss all the great Frederica Manor dinners that we had.
We miss you.
We miss you, Grandpa.
Hello, my name is Michelle. One of the biggest things I'll miss about Grandpa is that huge belly laugh that could fill an entire room. I'll also never forget these 2 fingers that went right in the middle of my back to make sure I was sitting up straight at the dinner table. I'm going to miss you so much, Grandpa. Mwah.
My name is Jackie De Leon. I am Mike Atchison's youngest daughter. And 8 years ago, Grandpa told me that I sing like Grandma Betty. So here's to you, Grandpa. My chains are gone, I've been set free. My God, my Savior has ransomed me. And like a flood, His mercy reigns, unending love. Amazing grace. I love you, Grandpa.
And so now, as we close our time together, I want to do a few housekeeping things again before our blessing, and then we'll move into breakout rooms. So, a few closing Zoom details. This is being recorded, and we'll be optimizing it for YouTube over the next day or so, but it should be able to be accessed on our church's YouTube channel, The Table, United Church of Christ of La Mesa, by tomorrow evening. So that can be shared widely after, if you know those who couldn't make it, but would like to have viewed this service. I also want to let you know from the family's information that per Tom's preferences, he has been cremated and would like to have his ashes, as Betty's were, scattered at Horsehead Bay. And so the family is planning a memorial and party at Horsehead Bay Saturday, July 24th, and all family and friends are invited to attend. We're hopeful that things may have opened up a bit and that in-person gatherings are feasible at that time. But assuming all that, start making some Northwest plans. You can also, as well as the Kudo board, you can mail cards to the address that will be put in the chat as well. And Pat will be putting the content of those cards into the Kudo board if you don't want to do that directly. So thank you for that option as well, Pat. And finally, we will be moving into the option for breakout rooms. This is a way we're doing a reception after this service. So we've put 5 breakout rooms together for different groups, affinity groups perhaps you could say, of Tom's life. And those will start after the blessing. Give us a couple minutes to transition into that capacity. But if you would like to stick around for a sort of reception in different breakout rooms that you can move yourself around manually in, then stick around. And if not, then go with this blessing. Now may the Holy One bless you and keep you. May God's face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May we bear one another's griefs and share in one another's joys as we go forth, carrying Tom with us always. Amen.